Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Catherine Duffy, and I am the Director of Professional Development here at SAES, and we are honored to have you here on our webinar around high-performing boards. We're going to have a great evening, and I'm joined today by our Executive Director, Rob Devlin. Hi, Rob. Welcome.
Good evening.
Couple of housekeeping items before we begin. This is a recorded webinar, so if you're watching from a recording, this will be in about an hour long, and we're glad you're here. If you are watching with us live, you can interact with us by joining in on the chat. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions or anything like that, please feel free to put those in the chat. We are recording this for later and want people to be able to watch it at their leisure. So I guess that is it for our housekeeping, Rob. So if you want to go ahead and get us started, and we'll jump right in.
Well, actually, I do have one other piece of housekeeping detail that I always like to do, and it's kind of our standard disclaimer. And so I like to get this in the recording as well, that the information that we're going to provide for you guys in this webinar does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all the information, all the content and materials that we reference here tonight are for general informational purposes only. The information may not even constitute the very most up-to-date legal or other information. It may contain links and references to third parties, and such links and references are only for the convenience of all of our participants this evening. SAES and its members do not necessarily recommend or endorse the contents of any third parties that we reference today. So, standard disclaimer to get started. And then I'm going to go ahead and share a screen with you guys, and we'll jump right in. All right, give me a thumbs up if you guys can see that best performances. Perfect. We are ready to roll. So as Mary Catherine said, we're here to talk a little bit about some of the best practices of a high performing board. And again, it's important information for all of us to have. For some of you, some of this is going to be a review or a reaffirmation of some of the things that you're doing, but hopefully there's going to be some nuggets in here that will spur some changes and some actions with your boards as well. So Mary Catherine, where do you think we should go today?
Well, one of the things that I think about as we think about where we're going is this concept of high performing being a little bit above maybe what you should be doing, right? We've got what we should be doing, and then we've got maybe even a little bit better. And then for me, high performing is what is the very best that you could be doing in every area. So I think that's where we're going.
Absolutely, you got it. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the vital signs. How can you tell if your board is operating at a high level? We're going to talk about this issue of governance as a leadership practice. And then we're going to talk about, again, the best practices of high-performing boards. And then we're going to look at some supporting perspectives from some other associations and organizations that may support some of the claims that we're going to make for you guys today. Before we get started, I would love for you guys just to take a minute, and I see that Sharon and Rod, you guys are bouncing around a little bit. You guys are hearing us okay?
I don't know if they can hear us.
Sure. I just want to make sure.
We were muted. Yes, we can hear you. We're just trying to get a volume a little bit louder. We've got a Bluetooth speaker. Just a little. Keep going.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
Just wanted to make sure we weren't losing you guys. Hey, here's the first thing I'd like for you to do. Just a little scrap piece of paper or a note card, something you have sitting available. I just want you to jot down. We'll just take a minute, and I want you to write down two things. Number one, what is the most important role and responsibility of the board? And then below that, I want you to write down what you think is the most important role or responsibility of the head of school. And again, the key word there, the most important, not all of the roles and responsibilities of the board or all the roles and responsibilities of the head. Just what is the most important? Can you capture that in one short sentence? You got about 30 seconds to write that down.
Maybe you guys can put that in the chat so that we can see
I don't want them to share it, Mary Catherine, because I don't want
Oh,
them
no.
obligated that maybe, oh no, I don't want to have the wrong answer. There's, I don't want
Okay.
the right answer
Fair
or
enough.
the wrong answer to this.
Right.
But eventually what you're going to do is you're going to compare what you start with today, and then we're going to re-examine that at the end. And perhaps maybe there's some growth edges there or some new understandings of the main responsibility of the board and of the head. So we'll kind of define a starting point. And then we'll look at it at the end and see if we've moved the needle at all for you guys. All right, we got about 10 more seconds. I see Peggy has joined us. I'm going to let her in.
Yeah.
Let her get started. And Peggy is Kingsville, is that right?
That's right.
Good morning. Good evening.
Hi, Peggy. Welcome.
My friend Mary Cuminato. I don't know if you can see her.
Hi, welcome.
Great to see you guys. So Peggy is coming to us from Kingsville. And then Sharon and her team is coming to us from McAllen. And then Cynthia I failed to introduce because she and I are, I don't know if she would consider me a friend, but she is one of the most trusted friends and former board members of mine at St. George in San Antonio. And she's just a brilliant leader, just the definition of just authentic and humble, but very effective leadership. And so anyway, it's great to have you all on the call. And we're just taking a moment, Peggy, to write down the answer to these two questions. What is the most important role and responsibility of the board? And then what is the most important role and responsibility of the head? And so everyone, board members, heads, whoever's in the room, rectors, if you guys write this information down and then just kind of set it aside, we're going to come back and examine that when we come to the end of our presentation today and see if we learned anything or not. All right, so moving on. I think Mary Catherine, when she was describing where we're headed today, hit the nail on the head exactly, because we want to get beyond just kind of the most basic kind of state compliance level stuff, all of the things that we all have to do. Otherwise, we're in violation of state law. And then we even want to get beyond just the accreditation piece, right? You guys are all accredited members of the Southwestern Association of Episcopal Schools, which means there's a series of standards which we expect you to adhere to. And those are very important. But again, we want to transcend that even and get to kind of what some of these key vital signs of the highest performing schools. And so what are these key, we're going to examine the key vital signs of the highest performing schools to give us all kind of a benchmark to aspire to. Does that sound about right, Mary Catherine?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay. So Mary Catherine, here's just some general hodgepodge list, if you will, of some vital signs to consider. Are there any on this list that in your experience as our director of professional learning for the association that you see as something that schools tend to struggle with a little bit?
Well, I think probably the first one seems to me to be the biggest one, and it's this, maybe even the first two bullet points, and it's this idea around faculty salaries and professional development. Most schools are spending about 70% of their revenue is spent, of their expenses on their people, whether it's their salaries and their professional development and benefits or whatever. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle to keep up with public school and charter schools. And we tend not to be paying our people as well as we could because it's a struggle. And so I think for me, that seems like the biggest issue that we see kind of across the board. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we visit schools, again, this is something that's aspirational for most schools. And it's an important goal, and it takes some serious planning, some long-range financial planning to get to that point. And so I guess to your point, Mary Catherine, I wouldn't feel awful if you're not to that point yet. The point is that something that we all want to aspire to get to, because really our faculty and our staff, that is the lifeblood. What the people are what make our community so great. And anything that we can do to support or to retain the very best people, to attract the very best people, I think are going to pay huge dividends down the road. Now, you may or may not be at a place where you're able to achieve that. And you may be tempted to think, well, I can get some great people to work here, and we're just going to pay them about 50%, and we'll spend our money in other ways. I would really encourage you. One of the key vital signs of a really high-performing school and a high-performing board is that they're paying attention to taking care of the people that work for them. And so I think that's the biggest one, right? The other things, again, this ongoing evaluation for the head, ongoing evaluation, that's something that's easily gets pushed to the side.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, is the board being strategic in its thinking, or is it veering into some operational lanes where maybe it's not a great idea for them to be driving? We'll explore these ideas as we move along that we go, right? And so again, these are the main categories that the vital signs will apply to. Of course, there's the marketing enrollment side of things, which is your primary source of revenues is the families and the students that you can attract. There's the facility piece, right? There's the program piece, the curriculum. There's the advancement piece and how you're able to raise funds and raise the profile of your community. There's the governance piece of how you manage the operations of the school, but more importantly, how you govern and position your community for long-term success. And then, of course, there's the financial management piece as well. So these are all some of the keys to great board work for schools. So the question I hear is this, right? And you guys wrote it down, so I'm curious if you might be able to compare what you wrote down to this. But this is what the National Association of Independent Schools would say. They published some documents. One's called the Principles of Good Practice for Independent Schools. Again, we're Episcopal schools, so we're a little bit higher standard with respect to the spiritual aspect of things. But there's a lot of crossover on independent school governance and Episcopal school governance. And what NAIS will say with respect to the role of the board is that the board is the guardian of the school's mission. That's their number one responsibility, is to ensure that the mission is relevant and vital to the community that it serves. And their job is to monitor the success of the school and influence in fulfilling the mission of the school, right? And so Episcopal identity is wrapped up into that. And so that's our role at the highest level as board members, is to make sure that nothing else can detract us from our mission. Mary Catherine, any thoughts on mission and Episcopal identity side of things?
No, I think you hit it on the head. I think that a lot of what we talked about back in the vital signs kind of falls under the umbrella of this. And I just would encourage boards the most successful, highest performing boards, in my opinion, always are keeping this at the heart of what they do. Every single thing that they're thinking about what is the school's mission and what are we doing to make sure that mission is going forward.
I think, and Mary Catherine, you said something pretty important there. They ask themselves constantly, is what we're doing or the direction we're heading or the decisions that we're making or the advice that we're giving, is it in line with our mission? Right. And that mission hopefully is very clearly tied to the Episcopal identity. And I know with parish day schools like you guys all are, that's going to be the case. So that mission appropriateness of all of our decisions and looking at every decision through the lens of mission is critically important. So, Mary Catherine, I don't know if this is true where you are in Harlingen or if it's true in Kingsville or McAllen, but it's certainly true in San Antonio. Lots of times I'll find here in San Antonio that as I'm driving down the freeway, there'll be, trucks or other cars driving in the wrong lane. And they're putzing in the slow lane, or they're putzing in the fast lane, or they're driving super fast in the far right hand lane, and it drives me crazy. But in in terms of the work of school boards, there are certain lanes that we need to be driving in and certain lanes that we probably shouldn't be driving in on a regular basis. Of course, there's exceptions, and sometimes, pandemics and crazy things happen that require some blurring of the lines, if you will. But if you think of it in terms of, what lanes should a high performing board be driving in the vast majority of the time, there are these three lanes, right? There's the fiduciary lane. Mary Catherine, what in your mind, what kinds of fiduciary things come to mind when you think about the fiduciary lane that boards should be driving in?
Well, usually it's, the first thing that comes to mind really is the financial side of the school, the budget, the audits, making sure that we have good long-range financial plans. That's what feels fiduciary. I think also, this idea of confidentiality and care of the program. And I think all of that is fiduciary.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit it right. Budgets, audits, risk management may have a big effect on some of the risk management. I mean, some of the fiduciary issues related to
Right.
schools as well. So I think you can include that there. There's also another lane that boards need to drive in, and that's the strategic lane, right? That's the big 50,000 foot overview lane that we're driving in, and this is where we get into annual goals that are tied to a long range strategic plan. And long range might be what in your mind, when you think of long range plan, what do you think of, Mary Catherine?
Yeah, to me, that's going to be like 2 to 3 years, maybe even you could do some 5-year stuff. The challenge for me going too far that way is that, things change so rapidly. So I don't know. I mean, we do strategic planning in kind of a 3-year window, and you've got to have a long range financial plan to go with that. So I would say for sure 3 years, but I mean, you could even do some stuff that's 5 to 10 years if you really want to just kind of think higher level. Have y'all done some of that 5 and 10 year stuff? Rob, have you seen that?
I've definitely seen it, but that tends to show up more on the
Yeah.
long range financial plan.
Right.
And then the strategic plan itself, most often, as you say, tends to be 2 to 5 years in length.
Right.
But certainly, I think the key thing is there's a lot of work and a lot of time and consideration that goes into building that strategic plan that we'll examine in a little bit. But then the annual goals that are tied to that strategic plan are the next important element that says, hey, we're driving to Denver, and we're gonna go through Amarillo, and then we're gonna go through Raton, and we're gonna cut across to I-25. That's where we plan to go. And so in the first year of this plan, let's see if we can get to Clarendon, and then let's see if we can get to Sweetwater, and let's see if we can get to Hart and Dumas and wherever that has taken us, right? But tying those annual goals. And so if a board is having those kinds of conversations where they're referring back to their strategic plan and then generating annual goals for the head of school and the board itself to guide its work, that's the strategic lane that we want to be driving in. As a board. And then finally, there's a third lane, and that's that generative lane that again, it's long-term, it's strategic, but I love it. Somebody once told me it's the thinking about not a school for our kids, but what we're building a school for our kids' kids. And so what do we need to do to make sure that, the St. John's community or the St. George community continues to operate and excel and thrive for kids, not just in this next generation, but for all future generations moving forward, and what kinds of things can we put in place? And so that gets into resource allocation. It ties back to the mission and the vision and the core values. The Episcopal identity piece certainly is part of that. I put the evaluation pieces of head and school and the evaluation of the board itself into this generative thinking, when you make sure that you're not only have great board members today, but you're setting up a great series of board members into the future. All of that is the generative lane that we need to be driving in. Is that kind of capture the main lanes, or am I forgetting anything, Mary Catherine?
No, I like that. And I think it's always important in that generative lane to be asking the question, what is coming that maybe we weren't thinking about? What do we need to pay attention to? And I think you talked about this on the board on the last webinar we did for board presidents, but it's this concept of paying attention to even global things that, not as if anybody could have said, oh, it could be a pandemic coming, but the idea of all of the things that are happening globally and how are those going to affect our ability to grow and be a place that our kids can come to. So I think you have to look at all of that.
Yep. Yeah, I put trends under strategic, but I certainly think those trends or
The big picture, the global stuff. Yeah, for sure.
The pestle kind of analysis.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Hey, so this is a really cool graphic that we reference a lot. It actually comes from the National Association of Independent Schools, their trustee handbook. And it kind of helps us understand, the lane that the board should be driving in versus lanes that the head of school should be driving in, and then where there's going to be some crossover. And so if you look at the top portion of this particular graph under policies, again, if you think about the time and attention that the board has, right, they should be dedicating the vast majority of their time and attention at the policy level, the strategic level. It's the mission, survival, leadership, the major decisions or major policies related to that. That's their time and attention. But hopefully they're willing and are practicing asking the head's advice in this area, right? So it's not done in a vacuum. It's asking the head to advise them or to weigh in on these policies, these strategies, because the head has a really neat perspective and is the one that's managing all these day-to-day operations and can provide some critical data to help make wise decisions related to these strategies and policies that the board is going to spend their time and attention on. And then by contrast, if you look at the bottom of the graph, the head's decisions, the head's time and attention is going to be focused primarily on operational issues. Again, and we've got all the admissions and enrollment information, all the staffing, the hiring and the firing of faculty and staff, program initiatives, new curriculums, systems in place. All of that is kind of where the head is going to be spending the majority of their time and attention. But if the head is smart, the head will will ask the advice and seek input from the board on these issues as well. But there's a key caveat, and Mary Catherine pointed this out in a previous webinar that we had done. Mary Catherine, do you remember what I'm talking about when I say, hey, the head, this is their head's decision area but lots of times it's good to solicit the advice of the board with one important caveat. Do you remember what that is?
Remembering that when you give advice, it doesn't mean that it's going to get taken. Is that it?
For sure. But the other thing that you said, and I'm putting you on
a lot of things.
The other thing you said I thought was so important is the issue of confidentiality.
Oh, yes. You want me to speak to that?
Please do.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a real issue because I think that, and I think it's, I would argue that it's true on both, in both lanes where there's advice being offered, that the most important thing you can do is honor confidentiality when it comes to, especially in that bottom lane, when the head is making a decision and they seek advice from the board, for the board to understand that sometimes we're asking that as a head, I'm going and asking your advice. Number one, I may or may not take it. Hopefully I'm listening and going to make a good decision, but it may not be the decision you wanted. But more importantly, if I can't count on you to be confidential when I come to you, because Rob knows this because we're a lot alike, I'm an idea person. And in order for me to get my ideas out and get the very best ideas, sometimes I have to throw out some bad ones. And so if we can't believe that when we go to our board and we're saying, hey, I've got some of these ideas and I need your advice, if that bad idea leaks out of the board, then that whole confidentiality thing is lost. And so that ability to be able to make a decision with the board's advice is gone. And I think that would be true on the top graph too, when it comes to board decisions and the head's advice too. So I think it just cannot be the confidentiality of the board and the head and that trust. That's so critical to a successful school. And I would say that if we're talking about really high performing boards, that is probably something that you would really be able to see in all high performing boards, is the confidentiality and that the trust between that CEO head and their board.
Yeah, I mean, I think an effective leader of any organization needs to be able to seek advice from trusted
For sure.
folks. They need to be a little bit vulnerable and admit that they need some help and get that input. But if they get burned on that because confidence is breached, then that's probably the end of the advice giving, and it's certainly the end of the trust.
Sure.
The middle lane here is the partnership lane. This is where the board and the head have a little give and the take, and you see that the line is kind of blurred there, and I think that's by design. COVID is a great example of where there needs to be a really strong partnership. Hey, we're getting ready to hit some super choppy waters, and maybe it's a pandemic, or maybe it's a very tricky issue related to a family or a crisis that happened at a particular school. And so, look, we need to really partner up on this. We need to have some really solid conversations and share some decision making. There's some standard things that may fall into this. Again, some of the authorizations or finance policies are a good example where there could be a shared decision between the board and the head. But depending on the circumstance and the time, there may be some blurred lines here. There may be no dividing lines. And so I think anytime that there can be a really strong partnership between the head and the school, where that trust is given and is received, then you're going to be performing at a very high level. So let's dig into, if we can, right, to, again, the fiduciary, strategic, and generative. So we're going to look at the fiduciary side of things. So high performing boards, always ensure that resources are allocated in a way that allows the school to be the best that it can be, not only today, but into the future, right? That generative piece creeps in here. I see there's a question on the chat. I want to make sure. Oh, yep, we're good. Okay, so resource allocation. Again, we talked about it before, faculty and staff salaries, but making sure that faculty and staff salaries are a priority, that you're taking care of your people, right? That's a great sign of a high-performing board with respect to resource allocation, right? Prioritizing professional development. You heard Mary Catherine mention that. Not only are we taking care of our people, but we have a vested interest in making sure that they continue to improve their craft. And so we spend our resources, we allocate necessary resources to make sure that they're getting better and better at their craft. And that goes for faculty and staff. It goes for administrators across the board, prioritizing professional development. And then again, a key one is this adequate leadership team. And so depending on the resources you have available, is the board constantly asking the question, is our leadership team adequate for the complexity of the role that we have here? Mary Catherine, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think all of these are important, and I think it's really incumbent upon the board to always be asking about these things. And again, we talked a little bit about kind of asking about the mission and are we aligned with the mission, but asking the question about faculty and staff salaries every single year. How are we doing? Even if you're at a school where you guys kind of got to that 85 or 90% benchmark and you're pleased with it, guess what? Next year, public school is going to raise salaries, and now you're going to be maybe at 75% or 80%. So it's definitely a question that needs to be asked regularly. I think the priority of professional development goes very quickly when there's an enrollment decrease, where that's kind of a quick an easy way to decrease your expense. And I can remember thinking to myself, oh, I'll just do that. And that's probably not the best PD that you can offer your teachers, is when one person is doing all of the PD. And I think this last one, gosh, sometimes we do not provide enough help for on our leadership team, and we don't even realize it's happened because we've grown pretty quickly or whatever, and all of a sudden we're running a school of 300 kids with 2 or 3 people. And so I think I think that's always a question. And this is a question, Rob, I don't know how you see this, but this is a question. It's hard as a head of school to say, hey, I need help. I don't have enough leadership team. And so I would put this on the board, especially to be able to look at that and be asking that question, because it's not going to be something that a head of school feels super comfortable asking or commenting on.
Yep, 100%. And we'll touch on that a little bit when we get to the head support and evaluation portion as well. All right, so another key that we need to look at, and I did something to my screen up here, so I apologize, but the key metric we're looking at here is the financial management of the school. Is it professional? Is it timely? And does it provide regular oversight through a finance committee, a board treasurer, and to the full board, right? This is a key metric that fits under the fiduciary roles and responsibilities. I got Beverly trying to join us.
Yeah, I'll let her, yeah.
Okay. So again, the financial management, is it professional? Is it timely? Does that have regular oversight? Is there an audit happening? And again, there's the requirements of the association with respect to audits of any operating budget over $1 million. An audit is required. And so that's not best performing. That's just kind of the middle level of accreditation piece, right? But is there regular financial oversight? Is the school looking at risk management on a regular basis? Is the school, is there some sort of document that they're looking at that they can understand where the finances of the school exist and where they're headed on an annual basis, but also on a monthly basis? That's critically important. And related to that financial management piece, right? Strong financial management. Is there some long-range financial plans in place that are tied to data that support the mission and the strategic objectives of the school, right? So here's where the fiduciary and the strategic lanes are overlapping a little bit, but is there some data that the board is looking at on a regular basis that helps them evaluate the effectiveness of their long-range financial plan? And does that plan support the mission of the school and the strategic objectives of the annual goals and the strategic plan? So that's what we're looking at. And I want to show you, maybe, Mary Catherine, do we have some time to show some quick examples of what that might look like?
Sure.
So let's look at in particular, I want to point to some of this data-driven projections, right? What's some key data that as a board looks at on a regular basis that indicates that they're performing at a high level? So one might be the financial data, right? We have a number of schools that use dashboards. Cynthia may recognize this particular dashboard, at least the format of it. It's something that we used at St. George, but it's borrowed from a school that we were friends with in Austin, right? And so we adopted what they had and we had used it for our purpose, but let's kind of drill in, because it's a very effective tool for a board to be able to use. Most of your board members probably aren't finance majors or CPAs, and they may or may not understand statement of activities and cash flow statements and balance sheets and all that kind of stuff. But this gives this snapshot view that's presented at a monthly basis can give us an opportunity to really dig in and understand the finances of a particular school, right? So again, you can kind of look at your key sources of revenue and understand as a board, where is our money coming in? It's through tuition and fees, and we have some financial aid that is a negative to that. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We have got some contributions coming in. We've got some other interest, maybe some other auxiliary income from our sports programs or from our after school programs or something like that, right? So here's kind of what we thought we might be on the budget side, right? Here in the middle, here's where we are as of April 30th on a particular year. Here's where we actually are. So we thought we would have pulled in, we budgeted to pull in revenue of 3.8 million. We actually pulled in 3.9 million. So we're $86,000 above budget there. We figured we'd spend about $388,000 on helping families afford. Again, that's an important part of our mission, is that we're a community that's not elitist, that we're the kind of community that is there to serve all members of our local area. And so how are we supporting that? We're actually overspending there by about 2,000. We figured we'd raise about 144. Actually, we've only raised about 116. We figured that we'd earn about 360,000 on some of our auxiliary programs. Actually, we've almost 400,000, so we're 35,000 there. And then these are key areas, right, of our revenue. And the same thing on the expense side, right? We know that we expected to spend about 1.7 million on our faculty. We've actually spent 1.6, and so we're saving a little money there. You know, what's you know, you may ask yourself, why is that? Why aren't we where we thought we would be here, right? Same thing with administrative expenses and facilities expenses and auxiliary expenses, right? So we are making almost $400,000, but it's costing us $339,000. And so again, this 35,000 is offset by, you know, a spend of 24,000. So understanding at the high level, and how's that compared to our total budget for the year, and how much do we have remaining in each of those buckets, right? And how's that compared to last year's budget? Right, that would be interesting to look at as well. And then again, you can see this particular school, you know, as part of its long-range financial plan, built in some financial stability markers, right? And in other words, a savings plan for the school built in, right? And so they have different funds to maintain facilities and to maintain the overall community and to build sufficient reserves to be generative for the school built in later on. And so, you know, how are we doing with respect to that? And then,
You know, Rob,
overall,
something I would just kind of point out here that I think is really good is that a lot of schools will look at a P&L, like a full profit and loss, right? Which is kind of hard to understand if you're not an accounting person. But this also, not only is it simple, it also keeps board members out of the weeds, where they might get into the weeds on a full financial, like when you look at income and expense and you're looking at all the detail of it. This keeps us up here where we're supposed to be. So I like the fact that you're looking at it, you know, here's our big buckets of revenue, here are our big buckets of expense, here are our big buckets of savings, and we're done.
Yeah.
I like that. And I think that would keep us where we need to be, and not asking, well, why did we spend you know, $27 on Play-Doh or whatever it is that you might see if you were looking at the more detailed stuff.
Exactly. You know, you want to provide some understanding for board members. They're going to want to understand, you know, why are we ahead or behind in certain areas? And so you want to be able to describe that, what those variances are, and tie them back. And that will very naturally help our board treasurer have great conversations with the head of school and with the business manager of the school to really have a clear understanding. And so that it's all coming out of the finance committee, right? But again, this is the variance analysis is important, right? And it's in understanding kind of where your money is spent at a big level, or where your money is coming in at the highest level, and then understanding some key metrics. These are from SAES, but you know, how's your enrollment doing? And then what is your days of cash and your current ratio and your debt per student, and you know, what's your percentage of participation in giving? All these it's a real quick, just little gauges on the dashboard where you can kind of see, you know, how are we trending? I think again on a monthly basis, and then again you can look if you have some debt out there. Some schools have some debt out there. Some schools think that debt is something that they don't want to acquire. Some schools see that debt is something that can be used strategically. So again, depending on what your philosophy is, understanding where your reserves are, again, where the debt is, if you have any, and what your obligations are. I think that's going to be important to understand. Here's your balance sheet. So you're understanding just straight up assets to liabilities and where you stand there. This school wants to keep an eye on enrollment, since that's the biggest driver for the revenues, and reminding themselves of where tuition is. And then again, some key dates and milestones. So the board is always aware, you know, we're here in the September meeting, and so we've got to finalize the budget. And then in October, we're going to start looking at investment and debt strategy. And then we're going to prepare the preliminary budget for the next year beginning in November. This keeps us all on track of where we need to go. So that's just an example of the kinds of data that a board can use to inform their strategies with respect to finances, right? So it's a
Right.
dashboard. And again, the budgets then are informed by actual financial data. They're not just kind of hopes and dreams. Hey, I hope we can get here. I hope we can get this many
Yeah.
kids. But they're tied to actual data. That's critically important. Any final thoughts on using data to inform strategy with respect to finances?
I love it. I love this. And I think this is exactly what we should be doing. If we're a high performing board, we should be looking at all of these things. And it's not hard, but once you've looked at it and you understand it, it's easy to look at that every single month and kind of see the changes. So yeah, I think this is fantastic.
There's other areas, of course, where you can use this same data. Admissions and enrollment's a huge one. I know that's always on the top of the list from an operational standpoint, but all this enrollment data is critically important when you try to develop long-term strategies for the school. And so again, there's great resources that you can use. You can build your own depending on your student management system. Some of it may be built into that, some reports, and there's some outside tools that you can use as well to understand, kind of what's going on in your region or your area. If you're a member of NAIS, you could use the market view technology to kind of understand, what's available, families that fit a certain profile that are good fits for your school financially. What's the trends there, and do some analysis, or using a tool like Batch Geo, where you can see, look graphically, where are all of our kids within the city limits or within the region, and where are they not coming from, and where are they coming from? At St. George, we had like 48 different zip codes that our kids were coming from, but there was a key funnel in town where the majority of our kids were coming from that helped us target some of our marketing and some of our outreach efforts into areas that we thought should be markets that necessarily weren't. So those are some tools that you can use, but this is all data that you can use. I'll show you some more quick examples of that so you can see what I'm talking about. But being able to understand, take a snapshot of enrollments and admissions work from a single point in time. So here's a March 22 to a March 21 analysis of a particular school, where they're able to look at inquiries and visits and apps submitted, and then understand where they were with enrollment and re-enrollment and total contracts, and compare year after year. And they can see that in this particular year, it was after a COVID year, they were at 438, and then a year later they're at 511 on total number of contracts in a particular year. I think that's super important to be able to understand, and understand again, drilling down. So here's some information from February, right? So how's that trending? How did it change from February to March? Who's not signing up, and why are they not re-enrolling? Again, this is important information for the board to have. If you start seeing a certain competitor, St. Matthew's, showing up a number of times in a given document, then you need to start understanding, why is that? And is it a certain grade level? But being able to, is there certain ones that are financially having difficulty? Do we need to raise the bar with respect to our financial aid, or do we need to think about a tuition in a different way, or tuition assistance in a different way, because too many families aren't able to afford? What does that look like? And so again, being able to analyze where we are and why our families are choosing not to return, right, I think is important. Looking at our families and understanding the ones that are applicants who decide not to come to our school, and understanding why they decided not to. Again, this is all important data that tells the school, right? Hey, why is it that we have a lot of kids that academically or behaviorally are not good fits? Maybe we need to tweak our marketing message a little bit, right? Is it that, too many of other schools are going to a public school, right? Or are they choosing other private schools over us, right? I think that. And now I kind of love this 6-year analysis, right, where you can kind of study, again, this trends over multiple years, but understanding, how are we doing with inquiries, and are inquiries getting stronger? Are they falling down? What's the 6-year average? And are we above or below the average for a particular time in March, right? And how does that translate inquiries to tours, right? And are we improving our yield from inquiries to tours, or are we not improving those yields, right? And then again, tours to applications, or applications to actual enrollments of new students. And what is our yield there? And is it improving or declining? And that way we can measure, if we have certain goals in place, we have some actual data that we can go back and look at as a board to tell us, yep, our strategies are effective or they're not effective, right? And that gives us some important information to look at it. Mary Catherine, any thoughts on data on the admissions and enrollment side of things?
No, I just Sharon asked the question, can SAS provide us with these tools? And I mean, you may be able to, Rob, you may be able to share kind of some of your ideas about this. I think what's going to be really important are a couple of things. Number one, we have so many schools that are such different sizes and varied that it is difficult as an association for us to kind of put together one template. So I think that's one thing. The other thing I think is that sometimes different schools want different things. And so could this be shared? I don't know where Rob, where you got this, but I do think it's important, even if you don't have a director of admissions or an admissions department, that you begin simply by just paying attention and writing stuff down. You know, you get this information, a lot of information from exit surveys. So that would be a great place to start. Are you doing exit surveys? If you're not, you should be. So that would be kind of how we find out where people went and why they left and all of that. But to your question, Sharon, about that, Rob, what do you think? How do you?
I mean, this is just a simple spreadsheet that this particular school put together to track, and they pulled data out of their student management system. Some student management systems provide this built into the software. Right. But my guess is, knowing the people on this call, none of us are in the market for, you know, these extremely high dollar software packages. And so then the fallback is to build a spreadsheet like you have here, where you can.
And that's what we did.
Yep.
We kind of did this on our own with Google spreadsheet, and kind of created all of this on our own because we didn't really have a student management system that would shoot out that kind of reports, and didn't want to spend the money on that. But so Sharon, to your question, just get in touch with Rob about that. And but
I'll
also
share these templates with you for sure.
Yeah. But also the creation of it on Google spreadsheets, to me, that's the best way, because then you create what you want and what you need.
Yep. Tweak it for your need. Right. All right. So again, and I won't drill into the detail on this, but advancements, another key area where data can really give the board tons of information and understanding, annual giving and how do we perform on this particular capital campaign, and what's our average gift size, and what are our participation rates by grade level, and being able to track those kinds of things. That's some more super important data. So again, these are all just ways to use data on the finance side of things or on the admission side of things to really drill down and using that long-range financial plan based on data-driven projections to support the mission and strategic objectives of the school. That is, again, something that high-performing boards do. And so if you can just take one of these, maybe it's the dashboard, maybe it's admissions data, and okay, this year we're going to really figure out a way to make that work in our school, then you're heading in the right direction.
Right.
Strategic leadership is kind of the next lane that we're talking about. And again, I can't overemphasize how important it is for the board to keep thinking strategically, right? The vital sign itself says that the school engages in strategic thinking on an ongoing basis. It develops and regularly updates a strategic plan, as well as an accompanying strategic financial plan. And I would add this piece down here where you take a look at the goals and how they're related to the strategic plan, right? Those annual goals. So again, maybe you're starting with a simple SWOT analysis where you understand, well, here's our strengths, here's our weaknesses, here's what opportunities we have, here's the threats to us, to our particular school. Doing that analysis, using that data to help build the key areas that you're going to look at for the next 3 to 5 years. Again, understanding trends in the industry, what's happening in the marketplace, in education, in private schools, independent schools, Episcopal schools. I think having the board at that high level, understanding what those are, they can be prepared to address those then. And then understanding the importance of strategically cultivating new board members, and then evaluating your head and evaluating your board work, finding new board members, giving them that the onboarding, that orientation that's required. Mary Catherine, I'm curious, have you seen some of these industry trends? Most recently, I have a slide for it, but I'm curious if you might be able to predict what some key trends are out there in the independent school landscape that boards need to be aware of.
Well, I mean, I think the whole coming out of COVID thing that's a real thing, and obviously that's a trend for everyone. Is how are we getting out of this constant COVID decision making and in the weeds around COVID policies, and how are we getting back into, okay, well, now we've got to get back into the regular business of school.
That's a huge one. NAIS has put together a trend book. Every year they do this, and some of the trends that are in this year's trend book have to do with what you were talking about earlier, that you'd mentioned as trends. Again, the economic landscape being shifted,
right.
The shrinking of the middle class, which for our schools, right, is a huge deal, right?
Huge deal, yeah.
For all of our schools. There's demographic shifts that are happening, and these are national trends. And I think, and I'm curious from the rest of you guys, I think that some of these demographic shifts may be working to our advantage here in Texas. Would you guys agree with that? I see a lot of families moving in, and Texas is being, fairly conservative, more affordable place. And so families moving from, this reverse Western migration coming back to Texas, those demographic.
One thing, Rob, the one thing that I've been talking to boards about that on this idea of the demographic shift is this, and it's not happening right now, but I think it's going to happen in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. And it's the whole concept of this younger generation not getting married early, not having kids until later in life. I think that we'll see a decrease of the number of students that are available to us because of that, because I think that there's a whole generation of people that may or may not even have kids, or maybe they just have one, or maybe one or two, as opposed to, say, 20 years ago, where people don't want to date myself, but maybe even 30 years ago, where we got out of school and we got married and then we had kids. That was kind of the way it went. So I don't think it's right now, but I do think it's going to happen.
I think it is happening right now. It's just not affecting our market as much.
Right.
I think that's something that's looming on the horizon that we need to pay attention to, which tells us as board members that we need to be able to prepare for dips or declines in enrollment. And does that mean that we need to prepare financially in other ways? We need to make sure we have some rainy day funds and some other ways to help us, weather the storm, whether that storm is a pandemic or whether that storm is a drop in available families that meet our mission and profile. And again, there's another one, it's workplace shifts. And you guys probably read about this all the time. I'm not sure if your schools, I'm curious if you would put in the chat if you've experienced this, but there's a huge national trend of, teachers leaving the workforce, of educational leaders and heads of school and senior administrators, just leaving the field of education altogether. There's tremendous amount of turnover. Are you guys experiencing similar things where you are? Because that is a definite national trend. And so again, as a board, that may tell me, hey, we need to really make sure that we keep the work environment really strong for our key people. Part of that is compensation, part of that is culture, but all of that needs to be really, we need to pay close attention to that. Otherwise we're gonna get caught up in a negative trend that can adversely affect our operations. Another huge one is this emotional and mental well-being of our kids, right? all the research is showing us that the kids, as well as faculty and staff and leadership, is at a tipping point. And so, that tells a board that, hey, maybe we need to do some resource allocation into our mental health infrastructure and be prepared for that. And I think that's another huge trend that can be strategic. And then, of course, I think the biggest one that's affecting schools and will have a huge impact on schools is this increasing polarization and division within our communities, within our culture, within our nation. There's increasing incidents of parental misbehavior, of faculty and staff misbehavior. And, we got to be paying attention to safeguarding that culture, that mission, that identity piece of who we are and what we're about in the midst of increasing pressures for us to fragment and separate and divide. I think that's a huge issue that boards need to be paying attention to moving forward. Are there other trends that you guys as participants are surprised that are not on this list? If there are, Mary Catherine, same question to you. Any trends?
Well, the only thing that that we've talked about before that I do think is a scary one is just the whole concept of the degeneration of trust around institutions that 10 to 15 years ago, it wasn't, and really schools are at the top of that list, schools and government, right? There's a decreasing trust in institutions that are the kind of the basis for our society, that all of a sudden we're not trusting anymore. And I think schools really are seeing that. And it's unfortunate. So yeah, Peggy says declining church attendance.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Absolutely. All right, good stuff. So this generative piece, right? Again, that's the third lane. And so high performing boards always ensure that the mission, as well as the Episcopal identity aspect of the community, is a priority and remains a priority of the school, right? The vital sign is, look, are you understanding and are you supporting the Episcopal character of your school and of your school's mission, right? And asking yourself that question, or looking at every decision through the lens of your mission and your Episcopal identity, I think is going to be, again, a key for this generative side of high performing boards. And the last piece, again, I know I'm pushing our time, Mary Catherine, so I apologize. But the last piece I want to mention is how important it is for boards to, really spend time and energy on head support and evaluation. It's the support piece and the evaluation piece again. And there's different ways you can do that. Some schools do that head support and evaluation as a function of the executive committee. A lot of best practices will suggest that maybe that's not the best role. Maybe you need to have a separate committee, because lots of times your executive committee is A, busy with other things, or B, personality wise tends to be a little bit more cut to the chase, business oriented, and maybe not as strong in the relationship side of things that they need to be. And so maybe there's key board members that are going to be much better at that support aspect of the head and support evaluation committee. But it's a critical thing, right? And so again, being able to have conversations about, here are our annual goals. And it's not a laundry list of to-dos and whack-a-mole items. It's 2 or 3 key objectives that we're agreeing as a board, and we're telling our one employee, the head of school, hey, this is what we're going to focus on this year, is these 2 or 3 goals. These are your goals for the year. It's stated, everyone understands, and at the end of the year, there's an opportunity for us to evaluate the head against some essential qualities for sure, but also against these goals, right? And so that everyone has a clear understanding of what we're being evaluated on. I think that's most important. And then again, the last piece of this with the generative side is always leaving room for these kinds of conversations in the board meeting. And so in the board meeting itself, if there's an opportunity to get the reports and read them ahead of time and have a consent agenda, if there's an opportunity to create a culture, and I can't overemphasize this, high performing boards always have a culture that promotes robust conversation. where everyone has an opportunity to share an opinion, that is encouraged to share their viewpoints, but in a respectful way. This robust and respectful conversation and deliberation, again, where there may be a lot of difference of opinion around the room, but giving space for that in a respectful manner, creating that culture. And then at the end, understanding that whatever gets decided is the board speaking with one voice, right? And so there's lots of different thoughts and perspectives and inputs that go into that conversation, but the result and the decision, the board always speaks with one voice, and all of that conversation is something that remains in confidence. I can't tell you how important that is to build that culture among your board where everyone feels safe and welcome and encouraged to participate. You don't want to have a whole boardroom full of people that say, oh yeah, sure, it sounds great, let's do it. Okay, I'm in.
Yeah.
People that will critically evaluate and think and and question and push in a respectful manner, that will listen to each other's opinions. But then at the end of the day, the board understands that the board will speak of one voice and won't go off and throw a temper tantrum because they didn't get their way, but can then speak with one voice. That I can't tell you how important that is as a high performing board to have that culture, right? And then again, finally, always including time in your board to have some sort of mini executive session where the officers of the board can take the pulse on how are things going, or are we not, are we, and they can get some constant feedback on the direction that we're heading on, both on setting the agendas itself for the board meeting and then the follow-up after to make sure and constantly evaluate, are we heading in the right direction or do we need to relook at some things? Typically the head should attend those conversations as well, unless it's part of the evaluation piece, then of course, then they're not going to be part of that conversation.
Rob, one other thing I would say about the positive culture concept is just, I think it's really hard sometimes and I'm speaking only to the heads here that are listening. It's hard sometimes when you put all of your effort into the work that you do at school on a day-to-day basis, and then you come up with these really good ideas or what you think is a great idea, and we're telling boards to ask questions, right? And push back. And it's hard sometimes for heads to not take that personally, but I would encourage any head that's listening and any board that's listening to say to the head, questions are good. Questions are, you kind of said it earlier, we're testing an idea when we ask questions. And so I think sometimes heads, because we're so ingrained and personal with what we do, we hear a question as a, you don't know what you're doing, or I don't agree with that. And I would encourage heads to not see it that way. I would encourage heads to see it more from your perspective, which is, I'm going to give an idea to the board and I'm going to test it and see what how the board sees it. Because the truth is that you can often get so detailed in your job that you don't see the bigger picture, or you've forgotten what it's like to have a preschooler or a middle schooler or a high schooler or whatever. And it's good so I love this idea of robust and respectful conversation and deliberation. I think that's really important.
And so I just want to close with 2 points, right? Again, the last point on our agenda when we talked about where we're headed today is some supporting evidence from other organizations. We talked a little bit about NAIS. They've got a great document called Principles of Good Practice, and we looked at that earlier, some elements of that. Again, the National Association of Episcopal Schools, since we are all Episcopal schools, when they describe high-performing boards, they always mention over and over again 2 key elements: the importance of healthy, trusting, supporting relationships, right, and the board, and the need for an awareness and respect for boundaries and appropriate roles. And again, you can see that all that we've talked about today is supported in these 2 particular documents, right? 2 particular statements, right? Healthy, trusting, supportive relationships, that's that culture piece. And then the need for awareness and respect for boundaries and appropriate roles. What is our lane? What is not our lane? What is our shared responsibility? Seeking advice, giving advice, maintaining confidentiality, all these kinds of things are captured in these 2 sentiments. So I rushed it at the end, but I want to leave some room and some space for any questions that you guys have for us at this point.
I love this dog. He always has lots of questions.
If
You know,
have
I think, yeah, I think, but yeah, y'all throw them in the chat if you have questions. I think it's really important as we end this webinar, just to remind you that it's a journey to get to the place that we're talking about. We've set a pretty high bar for what boards should be doing. And sometimes I think boards can look at this and go, oh, we're so far from that. But it just takes, you just got to climb the ladder. You just take one step at a time. Nobody did it overnight.
Hey, if any of you guys are interested in those resources, I can certainly share some of those spreadsheets and different things for you to look at. Again, all the numbers that are plugged into those are kind of just made up numbers at this point, but whatever makes sense for your organization, you'll be able to look at that and see. There's also some more detailed webinars coming up for your business manager and for your treasurer. Yes. With respect to building that that financial dashboard. There is a little bit of work that goes into that. And I am not the expert that can describe that for you, but there's some really smart people that we have in the association that can walk you through that. So I would encourage you to take a look.
We're going to be doing a financial dashboard and budgeting webinar in October that's going to be really good. And I highly recommend. It's going to be one of those 2-hour webinars where you get some pretty good details. So Cynthia asks, is there a list of policies that the board of directors should be reviewing and at what tempo? And I mean, yeah, there's definitely policies that you should review on a yearly basis and make sure that you have. You could find policies, some of those policies you could actually find in the accreditation standards, what the policies that the standards would like to see you have for sure. Rob, where else would we find?
Well, that's the first place that I would go, and I would pull those for things like whistleblower policies.
Right. Financial policies,
conflict of interest policies for the board, confidentiality policies for the board. I would think of policies surrounding misbehavior and misconduct among faculty members,
social media
policies,
employee policies.
And again, some of these are more operational policies that will probably show up in a faculty and staff handbook, but on a board handbook, you've got a good board handbook that describes spending policies,
right?
Just describe gift acceptance policies or something that you probably want to look at depending on your school. Just off the top of my head, those are some of the main ones. But Cynthia, I can go and look at and refer you specifically. I can pull those for you out of the our standards that say, hey, these are the policies when we come and we review your school that we want to make sure that we see. And it's pretty common for us to miss one or two. And so anti-bullying policies or policy, all those kinds of things, again, more are coming to my mind. But these are things that we want to see. And if we don't see them, they're going to get noted in your accreditation review. But again, that's, once every 10 years, you probably don't want to wait 10 years to see if you are missing some policies. So,
right. All right. Well, great job, Rob. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna go ahead for those of our people who are watching this on the recording. We thank you for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll stick around for just a minute or two. And if you have any other questions, so y'all have a great day.